I'm going to do this presentation on RC radios and receivers, and it's structured more towards 2.4 gigahertz, the technology, and what's involved in it. Yeah, sure. Okay, so as most of you guys know, 72 megs systems have been slowly phased out, replaced by 2.4 gigahertz radios. The new 2.4 gig systems mitigate the need for frequency boards and radio impounding. There's several competing technologies used by manufacturers, as you all well know, Spectrum, Futaba, Wetronics, and High-Tech all operate in the unlicensed 2.4 gig band. All these signals must coexist with other, since it's an unlicensed band, Wi-Fi and other signals that are in that band as well. Each manufacturer uses a type of spread spectrum communications, which I abbreviate as SS, which offers the ability of multiple users in the same band. And there's two major flavors of spread spectrum that you need to know about. One is called direct sequence spread spectrum, and one is called frequency hopping spread spectrum. There are also hybrid approaches that combine the two, which many of the radios use. And these systems are considered multiple access, which means they have frequency and or code diversity, allowing many users to share the same bandwidth, unlike a 72 meg system. Okay, our well-known issues with 72. 72 megahertz were FDM, which is called frequency division multiplex type. They use unique frequencies for each user. One user, one channel, that's it. If another guy was on it, you got interference, you got lockouts. FM was used for the modulation in later 72. It was better for RF link reliability, but worse for lockout problems. This brings up a good, here's my question. Does anyone know why AM is still used for airline comms in VHF? Huh? Simple's one? That's another one. Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, another one is comes back up to the FM. In FM, like your radios, when somebody else gets on a channel, the strongest guy wins, right? They usually have a PLL in there, and if some guy's further away than you and he's got a stronger signal, it's going to lock up to his signal. Well, AM, they use for that same reason, using voice comms, because if there's a guy taking off and he's talking to the tower and another guy that's 100 miles away is calling for a mayday, you can still hear it on AM. It'll mix both of them together so he doesn't get locked out. But AM has its own issues, but that's just kind of an interesting aspect of why they use such simple technology still for airline communications. With 72, obviously channel selection was cumbersome, you needed discipline, and we only had a finite number of channels. Okay, now we have the invention of spread spectrum. Anyone know what this guy is? Hedley Lamar from Blazing Saddles? It's Hedley, that's right. He had nothing to do with spread spectrum. Does anyone know who this is? Hedley Lamar, right. You get a free t-shirt. Hedy Lamarr was a Golden Age actress and scientist who invented frequency hopping spread spectrum in 1941, patenting the idea using a piano roll to frequency hop radio-guided torpedoes, so they couldn't be jammed. That's right. They didn't use this technology until recently just because it was difficult to implement. But now, you name it, cell phones, GPS uses it, modems, and now our radios. Okay, how does this work? I'm gonna focus more on what they call the physical channel, how this thing actually modulates and put data out there, because that's very important if you really want to understand what you're getting into, and to talk with other people about how these things work. Frequency hopping spread spectrum. Basically, you could think of it as each one of these channels here is like a 72 megahertz, very narrow band channel. And all this thing does over this band is, you can see, it hops from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and it keeps going. And it just hops in a pattern that it's given when it binds with the radio. It does not stay on one for very long. You're talking maybe 20, 50 milliseconds or so, no more than 100. So it's hopping very quickly. A direct sequence waveform it starts off with your 72 very narrow band, and it spreads it across a larger bandwidth. and the larger bandwidth basically gives you immunity to noise and interference that would normally end up in one channel and kill you. Well, when something shows up here, it doesn't really hurt you as bad. So these are the two types of spreading. The spread spectrum comes in that it's using a lot more bandwidth than it needs in both cases. And what it does is gives you immunity to noise, to other transmitters and so forth. Direct sequence, like you see here, this would be a very narrow channel that's spread across a very big band, and you can overlap them even. This is how Wi-Fi works. They have overlapping channels. These two won't interfere with one another because they're what's called different codes, which makes one look like noise to the other. And that's just how they spread it out. That's the technique for that. And what I could do is show you quickly. So if you're to look at something like this is a simulation of a Bluetooth. It's a frequency hopper. So you can see here, this is what basically your radio is going to be doing on a frequency hop basis, is this guy's just sending along, and he's hopping from frequency to frequency very, very quickly. This guy here, this would be like a direct sequence guy. He's been spread across there. He sits in the same frequency, but he's spread across a large band. And you can see, this is like a bird's eye view of the frequency, and you can see he's just jumping around. He's jumping from here, 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 here. And this guy is a huge swath of band that he's in, and he's spread with direct sequence. So this kind of gives you a visual of what's going on. Okay, so let me redux this for you. The spread spectrum allows multiple users in the same band. You can have a guy on two exact same frequencies with a direct sequence, and they won't interfere with one another. That's because they've been spread across there. That's what's called the spreading part of the technique. Direct sequence is the only communication technique that you can actually process signals with negative signal to noise ratio. So your signal can be below the noise if you look at it, and you can still pull it out. That's exactly how GPS works. If you looked at a GPS signal, you can't see it. When it becomes despread, you see it. And again, for direct sequence, the use of more bandwidth allows multiple signals to coexist at the same frequency, since they've been coded not to interfere with one another, and that's what they call orthogonality. For frequency hopping, the signals hop differently, so each one does not interfere with one another on average. So you can think of each radio getting their own sequence to hop on, and if they're not alike, then these things can coexist together because they'd be hopping on different frequencies at any given time that you look at it. Now they can collide at some point, but that collision will be so infrequent that it can get around that. Frequency hopping is typically easier to implement. Think of it as your 72 megahertz signal that continually changes frequency, as I mentioned. The receiver knows the hopping sequence, and that's how it searches for it to lock up to it. And typically that's what happens during bind, is you'll get a hopping, you do sequence 2, you do sequence 3, and that's how they work that out. Direct sequence more complex and assigns a spreading code during bind, and that allows the RX to find the signal but reject all others. And these codes it gets allows them to be on the same frequency, so you could have, let's say, 8 guys on the same frequency. If you looked at them, they look the same, but the receiver can pick one from the other. Okay, some other small facts. Direct sequence has better jam immunity for a narrowband jammer. Frequency hopping still needs error correction, since if two users collide on that frequency while hopping, the information is lost. Direct sequence doesn't suffer from this. So just like your 72 megahertz, like I said, if you were on the same frequency, you get a lockout. The same thing will happen on frequency hopping as well, but it's only going to be locked out for 20 milliseconds. When it hops again, it'll be clean. Frequency hopping requires higher power than direct sequence, and the FCC does allow more power in the 2.4 for a frequency hopper than it does for direct sequence. The number of users on the same channel in direct sequence is not infinite. It depends on the spreading code, and same for frequency hopping. If you get too many users, you get too many frequency collisions. There's only so many people that can hop on a given bandwidth before they start getting interference. What's that? It depends. It depends on a lot of variables on how many frequencies they're using to hop between. If they have 100 frequencies, then maybe on the order of a half or a quarter of those, you could have maybe 50 So it really depends on what you can tolerate in terms of the hopping and collisions and bit errors that you get because of that. No, it wouldn't be a problem at all. So the bandwidth for our radios at 2.4, they're around 1 to 2 megahertz. 2.4 gig band has 14 channels for 802.11, which is basically Wi-Fi. The largest interferer is going to be from microwave ovens. And the direct sequence uses codes that are, like I said, 32 to 64 long. That's what they say gives 15 to 18 dB of processing gain if you look at direct sequence stuff. And that means it spreads that signal 32 times the bandwidth it needed. And that's what gives it that big shape. Okay, so manufacturers. We have Spectrum and JR that use DSM-2. It's basically a 2-channel redundant direct sequence spread spectrum. It plops 2 direct sequence signals in the band where it chooses, and it uses that as a redundancy. For antenna diversity, they have the remote receivers that provides a good multipath mitigation, and multipath is when radio waves bounce off things inside of your cockpit, inside of the, off of a sign, or usually it's going to be how your receivers are mounted. So having a remote receiver allows you to mitigate some of that, because let's say you're having a fade, and a fade is basically when you look on your receiver saying that antenna didn't get a very good signal. Well, if you put these 90 degrees and in different places, if one antenna is not seeing it, well, the other one will. And so you get pretty good multipath mitigation with those remote receivers. Futaba Fast, they use what's called a channel shifting direct sequence. So they plop down a direct sequence signal, and then they move it around. They move it around blindly in the 2.4 gigs band, and that's what they call their channel shifting. For their antenna, they have 2 antennas, but only one is active at a time. They electrically switch it in and out based on their detected signal fading, which is done while they're doing this despreading. And they have a patent on this. You can look it up and see how they do it. The one thing here is they don't have the remote receivers, but they only have one antenna at any given time. Wetronics uses an adaptive frequency hopper, which, like I said, you saw will bounce between all these different channels. And their antenna diversity is pretty good. They have dual receivers, and they have circularly polarized antennas, which is much better than a standard rectangular, because it's less likely to have any kind of multipath when you're circularly polarized. So they went to the extra step to do that. High-Tech Aurora is adaptive frequency hopping. They have single and dual omnidirectional, sort of like what a Futaba has. And Spectrum, their new DSM-X is basically very similar to what Futaba had done, and they channel shift their direct sequence instead of putting 2 copies down. And they have their remote receivers.
So who makes the best one?
Define best.
Well, most reliable.
It's the one that's working in your hand when you're playing in the
Yeah.
Where's Airtronics at on all that?
What's that? Airtronics? Does Airtronics have a 2.4 gig?
You bet.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it.
Some of the articles think it might be the best one on the market.
Okay. Yeah, I claim ignorance on it. In my opinion, we'll get to that, but basically, Wetronics, since Wetronics has to be kind of modified and it's a modulated plug-in, now by far, their physical channel looks the best, because, as I'll say here, they actually have a backhaul channel, so they have the receiver actually transmits back to your radio to tell you what channels, what frequencies are bad that it's hopping over, and it won't use those at all. So in terms of the link, this guy has a lot of advanced stuff going on. Futaba is good. They basically just took Spectrum's method and said, hey, you know what, we're not going to put 2 there, we're going to just go across the whole band. And Wetronics says, okay, well, we're going to put a backhaul where Futaba just blindly will put the signal all through the band. So if you have a very noisy part of the band, Futaba won't know about it, but Wetronics will. and I think High Tech does also with their Aurora, and they're based on this new Bluetooth spec. Okay, this will get to your who's the best. There's really no silver bullet, but in general, jamming direct sequence is easier with large narrowband interferers, and jamming frequency hopping is easier with broadband noise. If you got a big broadband jammer and you're trying to hop through there, you're going to get lots of losses and things like that. For most lockouts that you read about, brand wars really drive most of the discussion. It's hard to make any kind of scientific argument with some people. Early days with Spectrum, you had a lot of brownouts from the receiver, from low voltage, battery voltage, and a lot of people would blame it on the Spectrum, the actual spread spectrum itself, which was kind of a misnomer. Spectrum did have also an issue with reacquisition after power loss. So if you lost it due to some glitch, reacquiring it took 3 to 4 seconds, which would mean your plane was in the ground, and it should have been instantaneous. Some people classified those as brownouts, but Spectrum finally addressed this issue in their 1.6 firmware, which you can get for free now if you want to have it reflashed. And again, reacquisition is done in a blink of an eye. It's unfortunate; it has to be part of their growing pains, but that's how it is. Yes, yes. JR uses all Spectrum stuff. Am I better off with 2.4? There's no question that it's better than 72 in terms of lockouts. But there's going to be issues with spread spectrum being widely accepted, particularly if it had early failures, and it did with the Spectrum stuff. And so it gets kind of a stigma. People are like, "Oh, I'm not going to use that." But if you have a club event and you got less than 20 pilots, even up to 40, none of these radios are going to give you a problem. Anybody that says, "Oh, I had a lockout, it was due to this stupid radio or whatever," there's going to be a different reason for it. And that fuels these corner cases and unknown lockouts with people blame on all kinds of different things. The real discussion should be how your RF environment and multiple radios start to stress the link. And I'm going to show you one corner case. It has a very low probability of happening, but I include it here to demonstrate how a laboratory contrived experiment can stress the technology just for an understanding viewpoint. And because I think it's important to understand the limitations. So when you're installing your RXs and you're at the field powering up your radio, you have a better idea what's going on instead of just blindly flipping it on and going, okay, whatever, I'll just fly this thing around. I think people should be educated and do as much analysis as they can or want to. Okay, so I happened to discover this called a feature about Spectrum or JR radios in about 2009. And it basically has to do with Spectrum's algorithm for selecting the two channels that they put their signals in at boot up. And that appears fairly random. As such, your radio can pick two closely spaced channels, almost on top of one another. And this is suboptimal. It gives little frequency diversity to mitigate any kind of broadband interference. It's possible this will happen at the field, but not very probable. So the corner case that could happen would be your radio chooses two closely spaced frequencies when you powered on your transmitter, and then when you were flying, some broadband jammer at the field somewhere cropped up, and it swamped that frequency band. It's similar with the very early on, I think it's the XPS stuff that only had one channel, and it would get swamped very easily. Some other guys verified that this does happen. And I'll show you some. Well, let's say, for example, anything like a microwave oven or a 2.4 gig video link or something like that. Anything that is going to show up in that band that's going to be stronger than you, or not even stronger than you, it's stronger, the plane sees it as stronger than it does your radio signal because it's near it, you're flying near it or something like that. In that case, I call that a jammer. Anything that's undesired is going to be a jammer.
Counting up the airfield with the trailer, we have a microwave oven inside the trailer. Should we not use the oven while somebody's flying?
Yeah, no more cooking.
Do you think gotta be strong enough?
It drops off pretty quick. So, yes. So we tell you yes. And this is what I'll show you. This is a frequency trace on an oscilloscope where I first powered up a DX7, which shows these two frequencies. So if you get a jammer over here, this guy's still clean and he's fine. He's working. So you use the diversity of having this entire bandwidth to put two frequencies where you want. So you can see even for the JR and the DX7, it's pretty good. It's very unlikely that you're going to get something to swamp the whole band. If you do, no radio's going to work. It doesn't matter what it is. Okay, so this is a Futaba fast signal when you turn this on. This is that channel shifting direct sequence. And here you can't really see it, but basically when you put this on, this is how a frequency hopper will look. It takes up the entire band. But this is kind of shown over a period of time. At any one instant, you can't see where it is because it jumps from here to here to here to here to here to here. And these are both of them on. You can see that the fast, the spectrum's a little hotter signal, which is good. More power is always better for jamming. And you can see they coexist no problem. This is how they're designed to work. Okay, if I cycle the power on the spectrum radio many times, sometimes it does a pretty poor job. You can see the JR picked two frequencies right next to one another, and the DX7 did better. What if I had a jammer here? What if something happened there? This is what bothered me about it was, this is a pretty clean band. Why wouldn't it pick two that are on the sides? And then here I got where they're both almost on top of each other, adjacent channels. Again, it's basically the frequency diversity is bad. Why wasn't it pick ones out here that are spread apart as far as they could be? This normally wouldn't hurt anybody unless you had this really rare case of this flying microwave oven that showed up here.
Hey, Jim, what constitutes a jammer?
To me, a jammer is just any noise in the band. Anything that comes from a Wi-Fi tower or anything that'd be using 2.4 gig tower. So let's say if you had a microwave in there, it would swamp most of this band. And so you can see this noise floor would basically raise up. And as that raises up, your signal power gets lower, and that's what causes things to be lost.
Are CB radios on that?
No, CB radios are very low in the megahertz. Yes. Yes, that's what I mentioned that before. A good point is 2.4 gig video systems do that. That's why when you try to buy that first-person viewer, they say, you can't use it with 2.4. You can use it with your, some other older radio because of that issue. You're gonna jam yourself, and so it's just important to know what causes these things. It's not to frighten you and say, "Oh, this 2.4 is not going to work." It's going to work. These are corner cases that I'm just displaying to you. Think about it. Think about what these things are doing, and become a little bit more in the know about how these systems work. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a spectrum analyzer. Okay, my conclusions, and this goes back to what you want to know which one's best. Well, Spectrum can choose these suboptimal channels on boot up. It's very rare that would even affect you, but it's noted. Futaba gets around this by blind frequency hopping, but it doesn't know anything about the band, whether it's noisy or not. Spectrum's multipath performance is better on paper when they use the remote receivers. It's actually near optimal. Futaba's single receiver with the one electrical antenna switching out is suboptimal for multipath. That's something I don't like as well. Wetronics addresses both of these using their circularly polarized antennas and their backhaul channel. Spectrum's introduction of their DSMX mitigates 0.1, and they also tout that they can use more users at once with DSMX. Large flying events, when you're talking about hundreds, 200s of pilots with radios on, you're going to experience a failure. I mean, there's a very high probability you're going to experience a failure because this band is only so large and you can only have so many technologies in there trying to talk at once. And the example is the Joe Null jet crash by David Schulman was flying Futaba. And everyone touts, oh, Futaba's never gonna die. I've never seen it. Well, he had a lockout with Futaba, and he said, well, he had his antenna under some kind of metal plate and stuff like that. So there's just all kinds of issues that you have to be cognizant of how this technology works, and not being blind about, oh, I'm just going to go fly this $10,000 jet, and who cares if my antenna's under this metal plate or whatever. Myself, I fly Spectrum GR, and basically because for me it's backwards compatibility. I got a lot of receivers. I know about the issues, but they don't concern me enough to flying at our field, for example. It's very clean out there. I mean, you can, like I said, you can have 20 people easily and not have an issue with either of these. So my biggest concern is the RF environment. What does it look like out there? And if I said if microwave ovens could fly, I might change my mind. So use what you like. As I said, technology-wise, Wetronic seems to have a pretty good solution. If they had a radio that they actually made and stuff, I'd seriously look at switching to that.
I'm not real sure how to ask the question. I've lost 4 airplanes. Exactly.
Okay, this is it's called AirView Spectrum Analyzer. It's the best one I found for the money. It's about $60. You can get their this is a little dongle that plugs into your laptop or whatever. And so it's a little hard to see, isn't it? This is a bird's eye view of what we call spectrogram, and there's the frequency. You can see there's something over here. I'll turn on my JR, and the interesting plot to see will be the first 2. You gotta keep turning that light on there. It's easier to see. Okay, yeah, that's good. So you can see, JR picked these 2 frequencies right here. You see them on the plots right there? I mean, you can go out to the field. If you have a fast, we can turn that on too. Yeah, but I can take this out to the field, turn it on, and know if I'm picking too close to frequencies. I can see what the junk is before I turn on my transmitter. What will happen with the fast is you'll see it'll just be hopping around. It'll start to look, this will build up, basically, is what you see, that rectangle we saw before. But these things coexist, perfectly fine. You can see some energy where it's hopping around. But for, $50 or $60, I can actually know what the RF environment looks like, which, again, I think is the most critical thing for, us flyers to look at. Not, oh, my stupid receiver didn't work. Well, before you turn on your transmitter, or after you turn on your transmitter, take a look at it. Are you happy with that? Is there something over here that is hurting you? And here, get this stood up and I'll show you. So let's do this. I can turn the JR off. And turn it back on, see what it chooses this time. Okay. Yeah. I think one's here and one's over there. I want to say, but okay. So. 1 second.
Fit in that poor chair. I love this little bit of Ben.
This is just a spectrum, and you can see, every time you cycle off a spectrum, it'll pick 2 new frequencies. That's why the receiver at boot up's got to look at all frequencies to determine which two it's using. So you can see this time it picked these two over here and so forth. And like I said, this contrived case I had is you might have to do this a bunch of times before you see two that are close together. And that, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what device selects the frequency? You said it listens for the open, the transmitter listens for the open frequency?
This guy, yeah, the transmitter also has a receiver in it.
Okay.
This is supposed to scan the band and choose something that's clean.
Okay.
My biggest issue is if it does that and a jammer crops up later as you're flying, what's the probability of that happening? I don't know. But yes, they. Where's it? Oh, can we bring it up? The plane, bring the plane to them.
Troy's got it in hand.
Ah, or just plug that in. So, for example, if this looks like. Let's see. Let me do channel 3.
It's gonna blow.
Hold on to this for microwave.
Oh, there. Sorry. So I got good stuff. This shows you how the technology works. If I put a jammer right across one of these, this is a jammer right here. So there's a 2.4 gig jammer I got. You see that big thing? Let's move it over. Okay, so yeah, we're fine.
Really? But if you don't mind. Well, nothing I found wrong.
Yeah, okay, so you see this jammer just showed up? I put this here. It's swamping most of that signal. But Spectrum or anything else, I mean, that's why they put the two on there, because this thing is just gonna, it doesn't care. All right, this would probably, if these two were close together, which I'd have to try to do it, I can show you, there's a good chance that if I move this jammer around closer to this thing, I might get a lockout. This is a little handheld computer, but it's got something called an air horn on it, and it's a tester for 802.11, where I can put a sweeping jammer or something in this band. So
You do that kind of stuff out of the field while I'm trying to fly?
this, yeah, right, yeah. Only when you were flying do I do this. I don't know who I am. They might, but it wouldn't be that hot. Because I'll just, if I turn this off, you see, oh wait, goes that jammer. So this is an interesting case right here. So let me see on that side, just for a moment. Where it's going to show up. Move it over.
Oh.
How's that?
Wow. Hang around. I didn't get a newsletter.
So again, how probable this is out in the field? Probably not. Educational at this point. That could it happen? Sure, it could happen. But knowing what does happen at this point, I still have full control of this thing. There's so many variables. It depends on how strong that jammer is. That's probably almost as strong as my signal itself. And let's see if we can do this. Hold that jammer. Yeah, see, so the jammers, I mean, it's right next to the receiver. In that band, you see it swamping both of them. There's still some you can see over it. It's still, you can see my signal still up above there. But, you know, it takes a lot. Here, do you want me to put mine in low power too?
Sure.
Okay, see, I got nothing.
Got it. Yeah.
So you're not
If
allowed
I turn off the jammer, well,
Shake them out. Shake them out.
see, I've come back. So, all the factors of distance, power of jammer, how close the receiver is to it, all these come into effect. Oh, this receiver's in reacquisition mode, trying to search for that frequency again. But just like the 72, like I told you, if there's someone stronger here, it's not going to be able to see it. It's not going to be able to find it until either you get out of a multipass situation where you got a fade and this signal goes down and the jammer's higher than it, or if your transmitter signal's now larger to this guy because it's closer to you, and it reacquires.
I did get a newsletter.
My lockout last week, I was lucky enough that the airplane was in tight turn and started flying over.
Well, sure.
Sure. You're not trying for a freebie. Look a little shifty.
So good of him. Is he in charge of the newsletters? Is he on the sport here? Long hair?
Well, let's put this jammer here. You know, now my jammer should be about the same strength, or it's halfway between. You know, it comes down to a lot of things. How close to the plane was it? Did it just crop up? If your plane is flying closer to a tower or something that is emanating that stuff, sure, you can have all kinds of issues, and it could lock it out. Like I said, in this type of thing, it wouldn't lock out until you came closer to it by running with your transmitter, or the plane, the jammer or the interference went away, or you know, this got out of the situation somehow, flew closer to you or something like that.
Let's blame it on swamp gas.
Yeah.
It's real unlikely, number one, that microwave
Yep.
You been down there all winter?
It could be, and you know, it has to do with the multipath, and which changes quickly though, and usually it'll get out of that.
90% of these guys in here.
You know, it's not something that'll stick around, especially when plane's flying. So, yeah, those types of things are disconcerting, and you can't answer them. My point is I like to take this out to the field and turn it on before I start flying, and see if there's anything there, and look at my transmitter and see what frequencies it's picking. If there was something there like that, I saw it. I just like my transmitter.
If it gives these work, I fly it.
And I'd be happy to fly that right there.
I've got LiPo batteries in my transmitters already. I charge them about every 6 months. I think I'm going to start using them.
Cycling your transmitter does the same thing as what, you know, a Futaba's doing.
I've got a couple of little regulators that they talk about. You
top it all over the
two-cell
place.
LiPo, that's 7 volts.
95% of the time, what it picks is probably going to be fine unless you got something out there that you can see.
Got 2 settings
Like
on it.
taking a
Use the
device
6
like
volt
this and
setting.
saying, oh, you know, why would I fly? I'm not going to fly. This is something out there. I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is, but I'm not flying until I can pick a frequency where it's pretty clean.
So we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes on this.
Yeah, sorry.
And all of this information is available on the internet from various sources. There are plenty of places to go and discuss this stuff with folks who are just as smart as Jim who can put up this kind of stuff. So if you have more questions, I highly encourage you to go on to some of the radio-controlled forums and discuss this issue. There's always an active discussion going on about this very issue.
Yeah.
Keeping this for future reference. Yeah, we're over time.